Hi, this is Mike McCrease and welcome once again to Advanced Photoshop. This time around we're going to explore a clever technique where we make very realistic drop shadows where none existed before. Let's start out by opening up the picture that we've downloaded from Blackboard called Shadow. I'll double click on the hand tool to fit it inside the window. You can see that it is a single layer image where everything in the background has been removed. And by the way, as a photographer, if you're ever photographing a subject where you think you're going to need to extract that figure from the background, always photograph your subject against a white or black background. If your subject is wearing dark clothes and has dark hair, such as this case here, photograph your subject against a white background. And if your subject has light hair and light clothes, you'd photograph them against a black background to make your extraction process a lot easier. So let's start out by using the quick selection tool and just do a quick selection over the figure like that. And then I'm going to click the Refine Edge button on our options bar at the top. Let's set the view to black and white. I'll zoom in a little bit. What we want to do is pick up all the stray hair that our quick selection didn't pick up. So we're going to go to our Refine Radius tool, and we're just going to click and drag around the edges of her hair to pick up all that detail. Just like that. Now you see that there's some gray areas here on the inside of the figure that we don't want selected. So I'm going to go to my Erase Refinements tool. I might have to drop my brush size down a little bit, and I'm going to remove those from that selection. And then down at the bottom of our Refine Edge panel where it says Output, I'm going to choose Output to New Layer and click OK. And there is my subject. It turns off our background. Let's just rename that figure. Now I still want a white background, but I want it on a separate layer. I'll hold down my Control or Command key and click on the New Layer button. And that creates a new layer. Because I held the Control or Command key, it places that new layer beneath my previously active layer. I'm going to fill layer 1 with white paint. Now let's make our figure layer active once again. I'll double click on the hand tool so we can see the entire image. I'll apply the drop shadow effect. So I'm going to click on my Effects button, and I'll choose Drop Shadow, which is down at the bottom of the list that pops up. And in the panel that opens up, we're going to set the opacity at 100%, because I can always adjust that down afterwards. And I'll leave the size and the distance set at 5 pixels and click OK. And now you see that you have a sublayer called Drop Shadow. I'm going to place that layer effect on its own layer. I'll right click and I'll scroll down to where it says Create Layer. Again, you can't see it here, but it's down there. It's about the third from the bottom. Choose Create Layer, and then it places that layer effect on its own layer. I'll turn off the figure layer, and you can see the drop shadow. Let's make the drop shadow layer active, and let's free transform it. I'll take the top center handle, and I'm going to pull it down like this. Now your drop shadow may be positioned a little too low. It looks like she's kind of floating above the ground. I'll go to my Move tool, and then I'll just nudge that shadow up until it is right even with the tips of her toes. Now the shadow is solid black throughout. I want to make this shadow look a little more realistic by making it fade away at the top. So I'll create a layer mask. Actually, the first thing I'm going to do is convert this to a smart object. I'll be applying a filter to this later on, and by converting it to a smart object, I will be able to go back if I need to and change those filter settings. So let's take the drop shadow layer and convert it to a smart object. Now I'll click on the Add Layer Mask button. I'll go to my gradient tool, and from my gradient picker I'm going to choose the gradient that says black and white. Now remember that black conceals and white reveals, and that with my gradient I'll be going from black to white. So I'm going to start out like right about at her waistline, and I'm going to shift drag down to the tips of her toes. And that creates our layer mask, and wherever there are black pixels, that's going to hide that portion of the shadow. So it's darker at the bottom and lighter at the top, as it would be in nature. The next thing I want to do is make the shadow a little bit blurrier. The closer an object is to its shadow, the sharper that shadow is going to be. So down here at her toes, we want the shadow to remain nice and sharp. But at the top of the shadow, we want it to be a little bit fuzzy. So I'm going to do that by taking my layer mask, and I will load that as a selection. Hold Control or Command and click on the layer mask thumbnail to load it as a selection. And then I will invert that selection. Control or Command Shift I inverts that selection, and then I'm going to transform that selection. I'll choose Select, Transform Selection, and I'll take this top center transform handle and I'll pull it down to the top of the shadow, and then I'll take the bottom center one and drag it up to the bottom of the shadow, right there at her toes, and press Return or Enter. Next, I'm going to click on the layer thumbnail, the smart object thumbnail, and I'll choose Filter, Blur, and I'll choose the Gaussian blur, and I'll set the radius to 4 pixels and click OK. Now let's take a closer look and see what we got. You'll see that the shadow is nice and sharp down here at the tip of the toes, but as it goes back, it becomes a little bit blurrier. Now you see that there's one other problem we have, and that's one called fringing. If you look around her feet, you see that there is a little halo of pixels there. That's called fringing. We want to get rid of that, and there's a quick way to do that. Make certain that the figure layer is active, and we're going to go to our layer menu and scroll down to the very bottom where it says matting, and then choose defringe. And we're going to set the width to 1 pixel, and presto, it's gone. And there's our finished project. Very quick, very easy, nice, realistic cast shadows. Send this to me on Blackboard and we'll move on to another topic.